Hey there, Mike Dunn, editor-in-chief of Tabletop, and I've got something very special to tell you about. It's a new crowdfunding campaign from Gooey Cube. It's called The Tomb of Gyzengax. It's a tribute to Gary Gygax and many of the legends that created the wonderful game that we all love to play. The link is right down here. Go hit it up, back it. You can't go wrong.
Hello and welcome to another We Interview video here on Gamingtrend. My name is Adam Marino, and today we have a chance to talk to the team working on a Redwall series of games called the Scout Anthology. It has 3 acts. Very exciting. I played the first one when it first came out. I'm very excited to see what you guys have going on for the other 2 acts. We have Chris Skaggs, who's the executive producer. We have Erin Marintet, who is the art director, and Samantha Taylor, who was the narrative designer. Welcome and thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Adam.
Yeah, it's
Welcome,
great to be here.
welcome. We're so excited. Now let's just jump into it. Did you guys feel pressure working on a game based on one of the most beloved children's book series for quite a few people? I know that it can be a daunting task, especially for those that are coming from having read all the books or watched the show or both. How did you guys feel?
Let me, I think I will start. There's that old saying, like, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Let me tell you, like, when this first fell in our laps, I didn't know what Redwall was. I hadn't heard of it. And so someone gave me a call and they're like, hey, can you make a video game about this? And they're telling me about the stories. I'm like, yeah, probably like mice and swords and adventures,
Yeah.
probably something. So I really had no idea until we made our very first blog post, which I don't know, I want to say it was 2012 or something. And we got a letter from this guy in Afghanistan. So he's a soldier, a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan, and he writes us this letter in pencil. It goes on and on about how much Redwall had changed his life, how much it saved his life, it made him the man that he was. He goes on, and I'm like,
So cute.
holy cow!
Yeah.
And then at the very end, he's like, "Don't screw it up," except he didn't say screw.
Yeah.
So and then that letter, I was like, "What the heck is going on here?" But then we kept getting more and more and more, and pretty soon I'm like, "This is huge." And so like I think that all of us had no idea. In fact, I don't think anybody in the shop was like a big Redwall fan. So like some folks had seen it a little bit, but wow, what a great fan base it is.
Yeah, like I said, my partner is huge. They read all of the books as a kid. They read me the first book. It's a really sweet community, it seems like,
Yeah,
and that's awesome that you guys were able to jump in full force and jump into something that you didn't have an idea of, and then you had to create a video game based off of it.
yeah, yeah.
Anybody else for this one?
I mean, I'm with Chris. I didn't know the I didn't read it as a kid. I decided my mom tried to get me to read the series. She was excited when she heard that I was
Yeah,
getting to work on it, but I instead chose horse books and couldn't figure out that I could do both at the same time.
yeah,
So I was definitely a horse girl growing up. uh, or yeah. Anyways, so for me, it's like jumping into it. It was interesting because I was part of the early development for like how are you going to represent the visual like races, like as a kid, like overall, not even just like individual characters, but like just how do we make mice, particularly because right, Brian Jakes doesn't his the way he wrote things was beautifully descriptive without being clear.
That's a great way to put it.
that's a great description for that.
Like the fact that both a badger and a mouse can hold a sword and it's the same length for both of them and not like tiny for the tiny for the badger and like giant for the mouse. It's like we as in a visual medium have to make this decide on rules, and
Yeah.
that was part of that first year in particular was making some of those rules. And so I Chris mentioned about that saying where you don't rush. It's like, yeah, we spent a year like making sure we had some of those things like
Wow.
figure it out, like how we're 3 months I think just deciding on racial rules like that were general across
Wow.
the board. Like it was exploration on how do we want to do these things. It
Yeah.
was specifically
Yeah,
I'm thinking about it was like a summer of that for me, uh where it's like just doing these drawings back and forth with one of our other artists who was on board at the time. And it's so it was one of those things like yeah there's a little bit of pressure, but also like at some point at one point like also no one in the community really had decided what things looked like.
Sure.
yeah,
So we also had some freedom to be able to make that decision anyways, because no one had decided what they're doing.
Yeah.
I remember there were discussions in that period that were really fundamental. Things like, do these creatures wear pants? And if we treat their tail, like, is this tail an afterthought, or is it treated like an extra limb? In which case, maybe they have clothing or jewelry, or like, what does this look like in the cold? Like, we had
Yeah.
really fun discussions. I remember one conversation, and Erin was probably the big leader on this. Is there was a word for this? Basically, do the animals go with their tiptoes or on their heels? I can't remember what the word for that was. Would you speak to that, Erin?
I wish I could remember the name. The name. I
A
know it's the G.
digitard or something like that.
Yeah, I'm forgetting the word too, and I should know it because I looked up. But yeah. So it's talking about if they're walking on their toes or on their heel, with their heels down. And what you see a lot from most, particularly with mice, if they're put heels up or they put on their back feet, they're usually heels up. One, it extends their leg out, makes them taller. But one of the things that we discovered and in that time of exploration was that when they were feet on their toes, we naturally wanted to have the character start leaning forward because they felt off balance, like just from the modeling and like the balancing side of things. How do we put them like together like this? I mean, there's a little bit of like with the tail balancing out that you can think of that way, like particularly when you see like when you look at other animals or I'm going to point to dinosaurs like velociraptors, for example. It's like they're actually a great example of this phenomenon, like where they are like, but that's because they're also an aggressor. They go and attack things, and so they kind of need to have that piece. And they feel with that aggression, we actually just made a decision that all creatures that are bad guys were going to be on their toes,
Interesting.
and all creatures who are woodlanders were going to have their heels down. It meant that we had this challenge when it came to animating later on, like, but that like, hey, our mice have a shorter leg and they have big giant clown feet essentially to animate. But what it did for their posing is that made them feel more at peace, more neutral, like just like settled.
Yeah.
A little bit better in the how like just this connotation of are they up or are they down?
Yeah.
And that was a fun piece. And so you'll see that if you look at how our rats are animated versus our mice.
That's so cool.
Sammy, I think you had, and just to be fair, like I did some of the writing too. It's several writers, but writing was different than art insofar as we have 22 novels worth of canon that we have to match, right? It wasn't like no one knows where the bathroom is in Redwall Abbey. Like, you have to get this just right.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in there when the timer's right that I also didn't grow up reading Redwall, although I definitely wish I had when I discovered, like, I was trying to get into Soma sometime after they had already announced this is what they were working on. So I know for prepping to like interview with Soma and sell my services, I knew that I was like, okay, what do I got? I can write. So, okay, I'm going to prove that I know the world, that I am studied up on Brian Jakes' voice. I had like this whole printout of like mole speak and hair speak and just
That's
Redwall
awesome.
slang terms that I found. But other than reading the first few books, watching the whole cartoon series that was available to see, like, okay, how did they adapt this before already? And then the wiki became my best friend of like, all right, if I need this subtle detail or to know what's the relationship between this character and this character, what is the timeline? I want to say that was one of the earliest assignments that Chris gave me, is like try to map out the series of events. And that was like, oh, okay, yeah, trying to just figure out what was the history, and there was all these things that are like implied and never explained.
Well, that actually leads me to the next question, so it might be great to direct it at you first. Your team chose to begin this game, it says, the winter before the events of the first book. What went into that decision as to your story placement? It seems like a part of that was the assignment of, let's get a timeline of what all happens.
Yeah, so I think the biggest reason is that we knew that the passionate fan base, there were kind of like two things in play here. One, they know the story really well, so it's a little bit boring to like rehash what they already know. Like in general, video games that are just a replaying of like a movie, like beat for beat, don't work out very well. But the other part was that they were craving new content, but they also love the familiar faces, places, and characters. So we're like, okay, well, if we create this whole new story that's leading up to or adjacent to the original Redwall timeline, then you can have the cameos of familiar characters like Asmodeus and Captain Snow, Methuselah and Matthias down at the Abbey. But then you're still giving them that fresh content that they're looking for. And then, just as an extra little sidebar, there's this notion that we tried really hard with the writing team to make sure that we were capturing the heart of Brian Jakes without being a one-to-one copy. It's kind of like people trying to imitate Tolkien. Like it's a very different, special sort of talent to be word for word like that person's writing style. And we kind of just were like, you know what, that's not important. We're going to speak to the heart, speak to the values.
Sure.
But if our, individual phraseologies are a little different, like that should be fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add. There's probably also when we first signed the contract was actually, and by the way, like today is the 13th anniversary of when Brian Jakes passed away, so rest in peace. But that went like for us on the timeline of events, he passed away like almost like exactly when we were trying to sign this contract. One of the things that did, and obviously the thing went forward, but one of the things that did is it put us in contact with the family, with his children, and now they are the arbiters of trying to make sure that this legacy goes forward. And I got to say, they were really, really good to work with. So them, as well as the Penguin Random House Company, like they were all really great. That's not to say that we always agreed on every little thing. Like there were, but there were good spirited, well-meaning conversations. Like, well, what about this? What about that? And I'm really happy that by the time we had kind of worked out the questions, there was a very broad notion, like if it's in the text, then let's run with it. We had no desire to like, reboot it or do something or whatever. We didn't want to make some sort of big thing out of it. We wanted to really honor the property as it was. And I gotta say, like, they were wonderful. They gave us a lot of space to do something that was new. And I think being in that opportunity then also probably validated what we were trying to do with the fan base. And so I think about like the folks over at Redwall Wiki and stuff like that, like they got behind us and they stayed behind us and they've continued like the fact that we made friendships there. It was really, really awesome. So some of that story really was a joint communication. And then probably there was at least a piece of it that says, we anticipate there's going to be a movie. It's almost inevitable.
Yeah.
Which in Hollywood, maybe nothing's inevitable, but certainly a likelihood. And if that's true, then let's make sure that we're positioning ourselves well for that. Like there was a strategic component to this.
Awesome.
But I do think that Samantha pinned it like this felt like the right place to lean in. And it gives us room also, like if we ever had the chance to keep writing stories, this feels like we've got a really fun base to work on.
Yeah. Well, that leads you guys are doing a great job leading directly into the next ones, because how long did it take for you guys to decide to go with the characters, the style, the gameplay for this game? Like, what was the thinking behind, okay, well, we want more of like platformer elements, but we're going to do this and we're going to do this. We're going to have these two different characters you can play as. Like, what was the thinking behind all of that, and what made you decide to solidify on what you guys did?
Gosh, there's a lot to say there. So for one thing is that for all kinds of reasons, partly because of the legal situation that was brought about by his passing away, there was actually a long delay. So between when we first signed the contract and when we actually started in earnest, there were actually several years there where we were on a back burner, slow cooker, like, let's see what happens kind of a thing. But that was a huge blessing in hindsight because it gave us plenty of room to think through things and try some things. And so you'll see earlier iterations. I mean, if you were to kind of look back through our notes, we had several different characters and looks and styles, and Probably the only thing that we really stuck with for sure is right on the idea of the scent system. It was a new mechanic. Like probably right away, we're like, what could we do that was different, innovative, and this idea that animals smell, right? So they like kind of really experience their world through their noses. That was a really core idea, but it's one of the only things that stuck. By the time you get into like 2017, like we're now in earnest, we're making stuff, we're building levels, but we came to a point where we built so many different systems and ideas and tools that the game really had no heart and soul. Like there wasn't a middle to it.
Gotcha.
And that's probably the wrong word because I don't mean in an emotional sense.
Sure.
I mean in a gameplay sense. It didn't
Yeah.
know what it was. Is it a stealth game? Is it an adventure game? Is it no one really knew. And we had a friend of ours, Mark Webster, who was one of the lead designers on God of War. He came over and he just pointed this out. Like, this game doesn't know what it is, and as a result, it's not fun. And so we had to actually cut a bunch of stuff.
Really?
But I think for them, like it turned out to be so much for the better. So if you probably saw the first launch when we first did Act One,
yeah,
that game was kind of a hot mess because it didn't know its soul. But I'd say like right around that same time, we really made some pivots and some cuts, and then a lot came together. And I think probably for Samantha, she saw where we came up with like narrative is a huge thing. This is a story game. Two, this is like an adventure game. So like the traversal and the climbing and all that kind of stuff. And three, it's a puzzle game. And if we use those three core pillars, we can make a really good thing that highlights, I think, what Soma's good at. And I think, Sammy, that's where you could really just go ham on this stuff. We can't hear you for some reason.
Gotta love technology.
Oh, this was working. Why
there
is
you
it not
go.
working?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. Just had to turn it off and on again. So yeah, once we had identified those three core pillars, we could build everything else around it, and that meant kind of creating this cadence of gameplay that went from your content leads to more story. So that's how, one of the early ideas was having this kind of like series of micro open worlds, so you were experiencing a story but also had a lot of supposed to have emergent gameplay opportunities and kind of counter to each other. Like they were definitely at odds. And so when we were like, okay, we can really tune this into we are curating sort of a Disneyland ride. You are going from beat to beat to beat, and sure, there's like different we wanted to try and make it to where most puzzles had multiple solutions, or at least different ways of going about. I guess there's one core mechanic you're using, but in theory there were supposed to be multiple ways to get to the end. But yeah, that you would engage in a beat of just kind of being in the world, beats of experiencing the story, a beat of solving a puzzle, whether that's stealth or just an environmental thing in your way, and repeat.
And Erin, how did the art change from the beginning? Because we've heard how the narratives changed. We've heard how the game in general changed. Did you have a transition from? Because I'm assuming you had, the art that you started with, and then you talked about the way in which they stood. How did that change going from even the first game you released to the third?
One, it got better as we went, and so the stuff that I personally am the most involved with on the art production side is characters. That characters are my specialty. I love them, and it shows that the later characters that we developed for Act 3, in my opinion, look better and are better designed than the characters from Act 1. Sadly, that includes our main characters, but it's actually one of those things I look back and it's like, okay, never design your main characters first. At least do a couple of things. And actually, Chris had to push me. It's like, and I've had to push back on another project of ours recently. It's like, nope, I'm doing these characters first before we get to our main characters. So I know the world, I know this, and that way we go through like, hey, these other side characters can get the kind of bad iterations.
Yeah.
And then we like, I know the
Learning
space
from
better.
the past.
So learning from the past. Sadly, that meant Redwall. But in this case, so the characters got better and better. Part of it in the way how they're part of it is like the rendering. We got better animations like as time went on, and we could some of those we could put back on older rigs. Sometimes we had, but we did like would at one point we changed how our rigs were going. We had like they're called T poses where the arms go straight out. We changed them to A poses where the arms are actually at a diagonal. So that way we wouldn't have because we realized we're never really doing very many animations where the shoulder and the arm go up, which means that we'll get smoother animations for everything else if we change our pose.
There you go.
That's an example with the characters, something that changed overall, like how we approach things. Another thing that happened is we had probably 3 different iterations of styles for vegetation. Yeah, that
there's a lot of it in this game.
Yes, it was very important we got it right.
Wow.
And one of the big things is that our first couple iterations were very heavy on the tech side. Like they looked good, but they didn't perform well at all. And we were trying to get the style we wanted while getting the tech part of it right took a lot of time. And I'm talking about like years of time. And I mean, we're also a small team, so we also had to like balance it's like, so we couldn't like be focusing on just vegetation for those for 3 years, but we definitely had to go like, hey, here's a couple of months, like here's a month or two here, here's another month here, where we're like trying to troubleshoot this. And then our tech artist Gavin like did a great amount of work on like figuring out what we could do, and like then having to go through the testing side of like just the back and forth there was a lot. It is a lot better now, but that's something that if you go like you've played Act 1 from way back when, you'll see brand new trees, brand new foliage of various levels, like not just like we have like I think 3 different variations of trees, but we also have then like 2 to 3, maybe 5, I can't off the top of my head, I'm going to say maybe about 5 actually variations of bushes.
Wow.
And we have like ivy now in the game. We have like it's not just trees, which is why I say our vegetation changed over the years.
People that are getting the upcoming release of the Scout Anthology are kind of getting like the best version of each one of the acts as they go. Yeah. So if you have not experienced this at all, or even if you have, this will be a new experience for most people. So I think that's really cool to hear. Hey, we learned from these things. We did this. We found that this was a better way to do it, and it all leads to this. And I'm very excited. But again, you lead into my final question, which is we like to end all of our We Interview series with this question. What is one memory in your time working in the industry that will live with you as a happy memory that you'll just live forever?
I'll start since we've kind of gone from since I was just talking. The seeing Sophia move for the first time, seeing her character concept go from concept to model, or actually it might have been Liam that moved. I don't either way, Liam or Sophia. Watching it was Sophia. Okay, watching her as a model become animated was like, oh,
it's like watching your child walk for the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm gonna like just was like, oh, okay, this is wonderful. Yes, I absolutely am in love with characters. So yes, that was a moment that just kind of really sank in that I love designing characters because I love designing people. In a sense, I can't really design real people because we are living, breathing creatures, but it's fun. So
illegal.
That's a great memory to have. I'm sure that meant a lot.
Oh yes.
Sammy, Chris, we got anything?
You first, Sammy. Oh, can't hear you again.
Really?
There you go.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay, I just need to like really yell at my mic. It's so hard. There are so many.
We've had guests where this completely throws them.
About, like, yeah, because we we won't probably talk about specifically looking at the game.
You can talk about whatever you want. This is something that will
Oh.
just live with you forever as a happy
Oh.
memory of working
Okay,
in
well,
the
that
industry.
case, I'm gonna be real gushy for a moment. I met my now husband working at Soma. And we
Aww.
had Chris officiate, and that was
Aww.
I just love this team that I'm on, and considering I walked through the door with no experience and they took a chance on me and I get to still be here 7 years later, like just the whole thing is just so
Y'all are so
nice.
cute. This is an adorable little group you guys got. That's
Well,
so sweet.
if you'll allow, let me cheat just a little bit and give you two, because one of them is brand new. But I'm going to go back a little bit. For me, like one of the huge coming alive moments, similar to Erin, was when we first started seeing voiceovers come in, and to see the whole thing come together with some fantastic, like the actors we got are brilliant. I could not have had a better experience of meeting all these people and working with them, and I think like Bill Russell in particular does several voices for us, and so he does the oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the guy's name, the narrator,
Jethro?
brother Jethro. He brought this character to life with so much like just like emotion, character, and he's got all these funny expressions. He does blooper reels. Bill Russell is incredible, and then on top of that, he does several other voices. But when I started to see these come together, see him in the game, I lost it. It was just like sort of like Erin says, like to see this come alive was so brilliant.
Yeah.
And I will never forget that. And I really got to give our hats off to our actors. They've been great. But just recently, this is a new one. This will be a second memory. Is I was watching a YouTuber play our game, and this was someone who clearly was a deep fan of the stories, and they were really into it. They knew all the lore, but they come to a place in the game where, and it's funny that we're having this conversation today. There's a place in the game where you're in a churchyard, and there's gravestones and all this kind of stuff. And somewhere in there, we put a monument to Brian Jakes, and so it's in honor of him and the lives that he's affected and everything else. And this guy rolls in there, and he realizes what this is, and he like starts crying.
Aww.
And to feel like that you could bring that kind of life to someone, that kind of joy,
Yeah.
touch their hearts, man, that's what every artist wants to do. They want to know that what you made mattered to somebody, and to see that live and not be expecting it, he didn't expect it, and like it was incredible just to feel like, oh, we actually did a thing. And that piece, that particular piece, was probably everybody on the team pitched into that. Like that was a joint thing. Like this feels like the right thing to do. And it's interesting we're talking about that on the anniversary of his passing, but that was a huge moment. I'll never forget that.
It seems like you guys have learned so much as a group, and you guys have gone through so much as a group. And for you guys to keep that, it's something that I said earlier, like I love hearing the positivity of the creator of a product and seeing like the passion behind it, because you guys clearly have such a passion for, like, you know, Erin talking about the models and Sammy with the narration and Chris with all the direction and stuff like that. It all just feels very full circle of you guys had an idea, you guys went through with the idea, and you learned, and you didn't stop yourselves. So I just want to thank you guys for sharing that passion with me today. Well, that's the end. We want to thank you guys for joining our We Interview series. It's been great hearing about your team and everything that the Scout Anthology has going on. Chris, Erin, Samantha, we appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. When can people play the Scout Anthology? What do you, any last minute things?
So the anthology goes live, should be Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam on February 20. And there's a tie-in, is that we also have another game called Feast and Friends, which is all just about cooking. And so that will also be on Steam the same day.
All about cooking, you say?
All about cooking.
You have another interview to conduct.
Very excited. Thank you guys so very much, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.